Welcome. What's up, y'all? Welcome to Watchworthy. It's your co-host, Brother Ash.
And I'm your co-host, Miss Chris D.
And if you're wondering why we're on Zoom today, we have a special episode. We're going to have our first ever guest on the show, a good friend of mine, Shamir. Shamir, if you just want to say what's up to the people real quick.
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate you guys taking on this documentary. My name is Shamir. I'm a political educator with the Block Trend. We're a community grassroots organization out here, and I rely heavily on, they rely heavily on me to conduct political education for the org, for the community. And this documentary has been used multiple times in some of my political education courses and classes. So
Nice.
Yeah, glad to do
Nice.
this.
Appreciate it, man, of course. And, I've done plenty of stuff as far as even volunteering or just, working alongside you guys. A lot of respect towards the block. So when y'all hit us up, it was something that we was looking forward to. So today we're going to be discussing the 2014 documentary Concerning Violence. You can find this documentary on YouTube, or you can have the option to rent or buy it on the internet. So the documentary is laid out as an essay, and it has a preface, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, etc. And something I thought was cool, this documentary was narrated by Lauryn Hill. Y'all know I'm in the music space, and Miss Lauryn Hill has such a beautiful voice, and her narrating this documentary really helped to help it to hit home, her being an American artist. The majority of this documentary didn't take place in America. So it was dope to, hear her to be able to narrate this. We do want to start off with a trigger warning. There's going to be a lot of raw footage in this documentary, footage of amputation, and a lot of other gory bodily harm, some involving children, some involving women, adults, people from all different type of backgrounds. So that's just a warning from us that it's a lot of sensitive content. And because this documentary is made up of archival footage from the 1960s and 70s war zone, so some of the footage y'all gonna see is stuff that they wouldn't even put in textbooks. So let's just get started, and Miss Chris D is gonna kick us off.
Thanks for that, Brother Ash. Definitely, I feel like the bodily harm and all the gore, it really was hard to watch at times, but I feel like it was important to kind of hone in on this message of violence. And we're going to be talking about how Native peoples, sometimes they have to resort to violence in order to fight violence. And so this is all really inspired by the French Afro-Caribbean psychiatrist Frantz Fanon and his book, The Wretched of the Earth. So if you've had any conversations about colonization or political education, as Shamir said, this is probably on your watch list. You've probably heard about it before. And so in the book, Fanon defends the right of colonized people to use violence to gain independence. And like I said, that kind of goes back to, if you're going to shoot at us to steal our land, we're going to shoot at you to take our land back. And The Wretched of the Earth was published in 1961. So it's interesting how we were having these conversations, 70 years ago, and we're still having it today. And just a ironic fact is that the author actually died at the age of 36 when it's like the same week his book was published. So that just goes to show sometimes we're sitting on these ideas, we're sitting on these conversations. We need to get it out there publicly, and we need to share it with the world, because everybody took to this book, and Fanon, I feel like, didn't even get to see how the book exploded because he passed shortly after. And then the book was quickly confiscated and banned in France. So red flag right there,
We're
y'all.
going to put a red flag there. Yeah.
We're going to have a lot of red flags, because this just goes back to how we're banning books in America now. When you speak the truth and when you want to get important information out there, that's all of a sudden they don't want you to publish books no more. So especially coming from a French Afro-Caribbean person, I feel like back then they didn't want us writing at all, let alone sharing our truth. So I'm glad this book was published, and it was banned in France. I don't know if it still is, but that really set the tone for this entire documentary. And so in the documentary, we see footage of Fanon himself. I believe it's black and white footage, so it's pretty old, but what he said really rings true to this day. And I'm gonna put a red flag right here already, because he said I noticed everywhere, France, South Africa, America, Britain, the black man was at the bottom of everything. So that's a red flag right there because I feel like no matter how hard we try to get ahead, no matter what country we're in, we're always put down. And that's for a reason, y'all. We know that they're always trying to put us down because we are smarter than they think. We are more talented than they think. We're stronger than they think. And so that's why we're always being suppressed. And so he said in that clip that we saw in the documentary that prison kind of made him numb to it. And I hate that fact. I hate the fact that we all kind of just get used to it, especially in America. I feel like some people use it as a crutch sometimes, like, oh, I'm never going to get ahead because I'm a black man. Well, you're never going to get ahead with that mindset. So let's start there.
If I could just add, like, I hate that when you see different groups of black people all over the globe have a lot of the same problems when it comes to how we're treated by our oppressors, no matter what nation they may come from. It seems like when we do get in, America, like sometimes black people have their own little groups, and it's like you got Afro-Cuban black people that aren't really fond of American black people, and you got people that are from the Caribbean who don't like people from Africa, and it's kind of like, dang, like we do so much fighting amongst each other sometimes, where it's like we go through these problems together all over the world. So It's just sad to see that after watching this documentary.
Definitely. I think it's also, because like, I think one of the things that like is really great about Fanon is he's a Pan-Africanist. He's a Marxist, he's a Pan-Africanist, and he, throughout his work, he's naming the colonized. His work develops like from talking about black people specifically to the colonized, because later in his life, right? So he's a psychiatrist in working for France, and he actually worked for France military in the Algerian War, right? And he ends up actually abandoning his position with France and actually joining on the side of Algeria. So like his work
probably didn't go over well.
So his work then transcended just like the African context. Like this documentary definitely puts it within, I mean, Algeria is a part of Africa, you know what I mean? But the documentary puts it in a very black context, which he was absolutely about understanding how blackness is put at the bottom of the world's class system. But he was also speaking to the colonized people, and that's why this book resonates in like Asia, South America, and even in Palestine, which is why I'm having this today. And in light of the ceasefire that's happening today, glory to the martyrs. And this book is really a glory to the martyrs kind of book.
Right. Yeah. This really is perfect timing for what we're seeing going on across the globe. Just different uprisings, and even in our own country, in America, we think that, we're a first world country, we don't have those problems. But I think it's important for people to watch something like this to understand, like, just as easily as it happened to them, it can happen to us, Sometimes I think about how, in Korea, you can't Google certain things. Well, in America, you couldn't get on TikTok a few hours ago. So, like, that's where it starts, but where does it end, And like you say, I like how it's both the perspective of the colonizer and the colonized, because I think some people are coming to their ways, they're coming to their senses, and they're realizing, like, okay, we can't treat people like this anymore. That's kind of why we have half-assed laws in America, right? That's why we don't have Jim Crow anymore, but there's still those undertones to kind of keep people in line. So I really like how, like you said, they use the term natives in this documentary, because it doesn't just have to be black people. I instantly thought of Native Americans. You think they wanted to spend Thanksgiving with us? I don't think so. So stuff like that, it really goes to show how it touches everybody. And so I just collected a few other quotes from the documentary that really resonated to kind of tell this story. One was to, quote, use what the masters have developed and turn it around for the colonized to use. I like that quote because I feel like sometimes we could play them better at their own game, instead of trying to work harder, just work smarter and utilize what they have already created against them. And I think about like the movie Woman King and how people were always saying like, oh, it was Africans who enslaved themselves first, blah, blah, blah. I feel like that movie really showed how like the women kind of turned it against the colonizers. and fought back. So like you said, definitely like martyrs who it takes courage to stand up to the people who are in power, and then not only that, but try to like outsmart them at their own game. So that quote definitely resonated with me. And also, quote, you cannot decide without practice. I love that quote because I feel like how are people supposed to know how to fight for freedom if they're not put in the situation to do so, you know? And it wasn't until, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, I would say, where I got to kind of taste that myself when I was on a college campus in 2016 and we were losing young Black people. And I had to decide, am I going to stand up and protest with my peers or am I going to sit in the classroom? And so you never really know until you're put in that position. And I pray that people across the world aren't put in bondage and aren't put in these positions, but there's more people who are than aren't. So I definitely feel like you're never going to know until your back's against the wall, right?
Yeah, and maybe not even, sometimes it's indirect, you know what I mean? Like, you don't realize it until somebody you know is affected by, you know, what could be going on in a society.
Right.
I think also, because like one of the main reasons that I try to make this connection with this book to like the U.S., like our context, Black people in America, is I think there's a lost struggle for national liberation. That's actually the next chapter in the book, is focusing on national liberation. And there was, and those were the two tendencies that I think gets forgotten in Black history, right? That there was one tendency that sought to like assimilate into the system, to make Black people citizens, but then there's another tendency that was fighting for national liberation. Same way the waves of national liberation went throughout the Caribbean and then Latin America. It was very much still here in America. So now there's something I'm studying recently now is the internal colonization theory, right? Where we're understanding that, you know, we can see these countries in this documentary as these colonies of Portugal and France and Britain. But sometimes we don't tend to see like Puerto Rico as a colony of the U.S. or Hawaii as a colony of the U.S. But then also more internal colonies like the indigenous communities, their nations, as well as like there's I don't have the number in my head, but there's millions of Black people in America, and it's beyond a community, right? It's not a sporadic community. This is a nation, you know what I mean? And when you look at it in that context, everything in this documentary resonates to Black people, even currently today with the way that labor is set up, especially when you think of prison labor. You're looking in California at these fires and you're watching prisoners being paid $10 a day to risk their lives, and it's this extraction of labor, specifically used in poor Black communities, Black and brown indigenous communities. So yeah, this definitely resonates, especially your next quote.
Yes, the quote that I wanted to share from the documentary was, quote, "Colonialism is violence in its natural state." Whew. Put a red flag. Put a red flag in that, because it just perfectly encapsulates how people think that they're doing the right thing by like, oh, I found this new land. First of all, it's new to you. It's not new to us. But, oh, I found this new land and I'm going to put my flag here and we're going to build something great. We're going to build our own community. But how is it so great when you're starting out by burning people's homes, killing people, raping people? You're starting out with violence. So I feel like you get it how you lose it, so to speak. You lose it how you get it. Like, if you're going to use violence, then we're going to have to clap back with violence. And so I just feel like colonialism, we always preach about, oh, the Pilgrims and they did this and Christopher Columbus and blah, blah, blah. And I just feel like they used violence to get it, so we can't really celebrate it, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially when, like, there's a lot of nonviolence is preached a lot to the colonized and oppressed masses, right? Like, I mean, again, when I think of like Palestine, you're seeing a lot of talk about October 7th overshadowing the the long genocide, you know
Right.
what I mean,
Talk
that's
about
taking
it.
place. And also, again, I think it's important to connect it back here because Black people are facing a long genocide. Like the suffering that Black people are experiencing today is a continuation of the original genocide of Black people throughout the Americas. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I think it's important for us to like take back those definitions, right? Like we can't have our oppressors define what genocide is for us. You know what I mean?
Thank
Like
you. Yeah.
we have to be the ones that name like this is you guys killing us medically, educationally. You know what I mean? Housing. You guys are
Economically, I was going to say this
yeah,
quote just reminds me of like the Tulsa massacre and how, like you said, we can't really get ahead if you keep snuffing us out with literally burning our businesses and looting our homes and all those things. I mean, they've been trying to do this for decades, and it's somehow we still continue to rise from the ashes, but I'm tired of it happening in the first place, you know?
yeah,
And also, this whole talk about violence that we're going to get into, it does take me back to the MLK versus Malcolm X and how some people were like, oh, we should ask nicely and work with the government and they'll give us what we want. And then Malcolm X was like, F that, we need to rise up and we need to get protection. And so sometimes I'm in the middle because I know as a communicator, I can use my words to like persuade people, but sometimes there's just no talking white people out of what they want. So that's when you got to clap back. And so they also said in the documentary, quote, decolonization is a historical process and sets out to change the order of the world. I think that's important to remember because it might look easy for settlers to take our land, but it's not as easy to take it back. It's almost impossible in some instances that we saw. And so it really does take time. I remember the documentary, they were saying like, oh, how long do you think this war is going to go on in Mozambique? And they said as long as it has to. And I feel like that's what's been going on with all these other wars around the country. Ukraine, Russia, Palestine, like you said, it's going on 2-3 years now, but it's going to take as long as it has to you're literally trying to change the world. You're trying to go against the grain. The grain says fall in line and we're going to take all your stuff and you're not going to get to say anything about it. Whereas decolonization, you're mustering up all the courage you can to fight back against your oppressor. So I definitely wanted to highlight that quote. And in the documentary,
especially I apologize. I wanted to just say like I think what makes that quote, especially when it comes to this book, like really like pertinent is like how decolonization is used today. Like a lot of people would be like, you know, I don't know, like decolonize, you know, the academy or decolonize your train of thought or decolonize, you know, Trump or something. Like you can't decolonize certain things, right? Some certain things are actually colonial, you know what I mean? Like in its root. And for now it's making sure that you don't detach decolonization from violence, right? Like it's a violent force. Like we are changing the orders of shit and it's going to be a violent process. It's not going to be, I don't know, the ways that decolonization is used today, it's very nonviolent, it's very defanged.
right. There's no way to sugarcoat it. And
There's no way to sugarcoat it.
Going back to like the mindset, I definitely have seen a lot in social media. I know we call people hotep sometimes when they're like, oh, you gotta, get away from the man, my brother and sister. And there is some truth to that, but at the same time, it's not gonna happen up here. Like you said, it's gonna happen with my fist. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. I'll have to take it by any means necessary. Yeah. And so in the documentary, we see footage of soldiers in Angola from 1974. So as Brother Ash said, we see like live raw footage from the jungle, from the war zone, from the 1960s and 70s. I love seeing that archival footage because it just goes to show even somebody back then knew they were making history. Somebody had enough sense to say, let me pick up a camera while we're doing this. And I feel like with podcasts like this, that's what we're doing now. We're kind of like cementing history for, years to come for people to look back at later. And so I love watching that kind of grainy archival footage. And we saw soldiers marching for several days, camping in the forest, and then opening gunfire, not even sure where they're shooting, can't even see everything, but they're getting through the jungle and they are opening gunfire, all to set people free, all to liberate some natives. And so that was really tough to watch because it's just gunfire in the night. And like you said, sometimes that stray bullet might catch the wrong person, but this is all in the name of liberation. So it was really cool to see them like doing it firsthand. And then someone said in the documentary, if you're going to be an activist, you must be ready for violence at all times. And I think that's so important, especially for this younger generation to understand. People be like, oh, I'm not like my ancestors. I wish I was like my ancestors. I wish I had that strength of people getting spit on and hosed down and getting called different names and physical violence and pushing us around and stepping on us on the bus. And all of those activists, they had to be ready for some type of violence. You had to know, MLK had to know every day he woke up, somebody wants to kill me. Somebody's coming after me. My own government don't even want me here. And that makes me think about, I said Gen Z because I recently was watching a show where one of the little characters, she was a high school student. She's like, oh, I want to protest in New York City. I want to join my friends at the protest. Her aunt was like, you might want to be careful. Like, let me go with you because people think it's all glitz and glam on social media, but you could be looking at tear gas. You could be looking at rubber bullets. These days when we have our protests, it's not just the police. They're sending the National Guard out there. They're sending tanks on us. And it does remind me of scenes from back in the day. And so I feel like anybody who calls himself an activist, you really have to be ready for that violence. Even here, I call myself an activist or advocate as far as using my voice on my platform, but not everybody's going to agree with me. You might have trolls. You might have people who want to stalk you and might want to take it from the internet to real life. So be mindful of that. You know, if you're ever embarking on this journey, you have to know what you're signing up for.
I think, yeah, especially like going back, connecting that to the point you made earlier about decolonization. Like, if you're an activist actively seeking out decolonization, I think it gets in trouble, right? Because like you think of like nonprofits and stuff like that, and it's like that's not going to be the decolonial. You're not going to be met with violence if you're telling the police what time and what location I'm a protest, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like that they're not going to face any violence in those manners, or you're not going to, you know, the revolution can't be dependent on whether you get a grant or something like that. You know what I mean? So like sometimes people attach activists to themselves and then attach the violence that activists have faced to themselves as if they're like really in the trenches or something. And it's like, well, like what are we actively trying to do in here? And it's like if we're actively trying to connect to decolonization, this disruption of the world order, yeah, you're gonna meet raids, like even, and it's so crazy because like in Atlanta, there's the Stop Cop City movement that's going on, and even the nonprofit organizations that are working on bail funds for the protesters actually faced FBI raids. Wow. So like even you having a nonprofit status is not enough to protect you from the violence if you're actually seeking to disrupt something, you know what I mean? So
at the end of the day, they are still colonizers and they're going to have their way. And it's all, like you said, with the nonprofit thing, I feel like it's always like, okay, Black people, y'all can have a little bit, but not too much.
Not too much.
And, and so I think this documentary, to seal up, you know, my section of this, I just wanted to highlight how they talked about how the exploited man sees that his liberation requires the use of all means. If you're an exploited person like us, you know, okay, I'm gonna have to get it any way I can. Other people, I feel like, kind of live on cloud nine, kind of live in an imaginary bubble. You know, white people don't even have to think about this. White people don't have to think about, what if the government just snatches everything I own? What am I gonna have left? You know, we as people of color have to think about that every day. Because like you said, we can't depend on a system that was not built for us to protect us. And so if you're an exploited person that is seeking liberation, you're going to do it by any means necessary. So like you said, that could be a grant. That could be, you know, a book, or that could be a film, a documentary. But some people, it is boots on the ground. Some people go through the government. You know, sometimes people say if you can't beat them, join them. So we got Black people in the Army, we got Black people in the FBI, but then we have some people who are working against them. So they really talked about how the only way we can truly tip the scales is if we use all measures. Don't leave anything off the table, and that includes violence. So I know that we try to, like you said, be holier than thou and think like, oh, if we use violence, that makes us just as bad as them. Sometimes you got to fight fire with fire.
I think that it is all applicable, and I think sometimes people can get carried away when they stop playing their role. We all have a role to play when it comes to the liberation of any groups of people, and everybody cannot be Dr. Martin Luther King. Everybody can't be Malcolm X. Everybody can't be foot soldiers. So I think it's all based on what you can bring to a movement and acting on it. So I think it's important because this documentary does just hone on it like, nah, violence, the only way to solve violence is violence. But because of that, I think it's important that we don't start off with violence all the time. You know what I'm saying? Because sometimes that can get taken away from what we actually need. If you ever see those people like when we're rioting and looting or like standing up for somebody who may have been gunned down by the police, but it's people who are just looting. Like, you're not really helping our cause by destroying the local businesses in our neighborhoods. So we can't just take the violence from it and that be the only part. You know what I mean? So, I think that's important because this documentary in itself is an example of that, because the writer of this documentary served his community by being a writer, by recording the stuff that was going on. You know what I'm saying? Whereas the soldiers that were seen in the documentary were soldiers. They were fighters. You know what I'm saying? So it's all relevant, but I do think we should be prepared for anything when it comes to liberation.
That line in the documentary really opened my eyes, because I was like, damn, we have to use any measure. Like you said, Shamir, it might not be a grant that solves all of our problems. And so I am typically on the nonviolent side for real. I'm normally like, no, let's pray about it. But there's some things we can't pray about. And we see how in our own country, January 6th, the insurrection, if they're going to violently raid the capital of the United States, sometimes I think about, what if that was Black people? What if we didn't like the result of the election and we did that? How would that turn out for us? So I feel like sometimes it's like only certain people are allowed to use violence.
And we don't like the result of the election. But as Black people, we know better than to storm the Capitol, because that casualty count is going to be way higher when the people protesting got skin that looked like ours. So, it goes back to what I said, we're knowing how to play the system. In situations where you'll be gunned down and it won't be a battle at all, you don't go in there guns ablazing. And now it's time for the intellectuals to get into the space. But it's all about, I believe, working together as a community. You know what I mean?
Definitely, and making those connections. I think also, like we remember January 6th, and then but the summer before it was protests and the ways that the state used violence against community. They were disappearing people. You know what I mean?
Listen, I saw reports about infrared lasers, using the best and brightest technology for harm.
Yeah, and that's also because there's a program, and anybody watching can look at what their local police department is using with the program. But the program is called 1033, where excess military equipment, weapons, those big truck tanks looking things, you know what I mean? Things used for military warfare are used by our local police. And you get to see the technologies that are used specifically to shut down our unauthorized protests, right? These sound cannons or these sound wave things bust up your eardrum. The
so
ways that they just
that, but I
can't
have a license to carry.
Yeah, it gets real it gets real interesting. And so in the documentary, the documentary mainly started is a period between the 1960s and the 70s, where you're seeing this wave of national liberation movements, and this is going a little bit differently than I believe the liberation movements of the late 40s and 50s. So right after World War II, you're seeing countries like Ghana gain their liberation. I believe at the time, Nigeria. A a lot of British colonies at the time, but there's also the second wave um, that relied mainly on the theory of like Marxism, Leninism, right? Where like we have a party and a guerrilla war, like a guerrilla unit, a people's army. Because a lot of the people in these armies, what makes a guerrilla army is that these are people. And I think that speaks to what Ash was speaking. Like these are people who are teachers, um, who are doctors, who are a part of this guerrilla army unit. And there's also people who are within the party, like the political element, the people who visit the UN. Um, but there's also this idea that, you know, there's this people's army that's going to actually fight for liberation, right? It's not going to be uh, colonizers owned army, but a people's army. And that's this wave that's happening throughout the um,
And if I can interject, I feel like in America, when you see three or more black people together, they start calling us terrorists. We're not terrorists. We're, like you said, a people's army.
Yeah.
So it's definitely, it's like that's what they did with the Black Panther Party, right? They were like, oh, the Black Panther Party is a new terrorist, when in fact they were feeding our communities.
Yeah. And Black Panther Party was also Marxist-Leninist. You know what I mean? They were very much a part of this. And I think, again, connecting it back to like our own struggles, like Palermo was that organization in Mozambique. You have the AIGC um, in Cape Verde and in Guinea-Bissau. And then in America, we have the Panthers. Like these are Marxist-Leninist organizations dealing with national liberation. I think also in the documentary, there's this portion where they're showing the contradictions between like where the settlers live and where like the native people live. And there's like a stark contrast in like
that was a red flag for me because
yeah.
these people, this is our land. First of all, this is our native land, and now you're creating resorts and stuff and having me carry around your golf clubs in the documentary. Ooh, I hated to see that.
Mm-hmm.
That was very unsettling because they even gave you the imagery of what the colonized man always wants to be, just to have a day in the life of the colonizer, to be like him just for one day or just for one moment. And we see that effect still with black people today, who would rather have the image of being wealthy than to actually pursue what it takes as a people for us all to have these type of things. You know what I'm saying? So that was very hard to watch to me, because I'm like, wow, like it's too many parallels, for Mozambique in the 70s to what I still see in America in the inner cities in 2020.
Yeah, like there's a stark contrast between like a 20-minute drive from like the section to Princeton, right? Like there's these colonial borders that you saw in the film like played out through redlining. You know what I mean? Like these are still things that play. So it's like I'm always constantly just seeing how this film connects back to what we face here in America.
Right. Gentrification, I guess that's colonization in a way.
Well, absolutely. You know what I mean? And it's dependent, because like you can't get the golf courses and the shit like that without the labor that you're able to get from poor communities, right?
Right. So now we have to help you take our land and turn it into something else just so we can survive.
So, plus, I apologize. I'm looking over my notes here. Yeah, and also there was that portion where there was a man talking about in Liberia. He was talking about his detainment and the torture that he faced while in prison. And it's hard. Like these tactics are they're not bugs in the capitalist colonial system. Like, these are features, you know what I mean? And you could hear the ways that he was talking about, the ways that they tortured him, how they tried to pull him apart, um, how they pulled other people apart if they didn't get the information you had. And you could honestly contrast these to stories that happen in San Quentin or
I was gonna say Guantanamo Bay, Rikers.
yeah,
Take your
you know,
pick.
Abu Ghraib, the prison of Angola down south. Like, there's a whole bunch of prisons that a story he could have been speaking from that story. You know what I mean? So
Right.
like that stuck out to me.
And I feel like the what stuck out to me was the fact that like all these men were getting ushered to go to prison just because they went on strike for higher pay. And like you
Mhm.
said, that's how they use us with the labor and the whole capitalistic society where oh, we're just trying to survive. Can we have a little bit more? And it's like, how dare you ask for more? Instead, we're going to put you in prison. Like that. I can't believe that because in America we are seeing a little bit of traction with unions, right? And some of these labor laws that are just now coming to fruition in the 2020s. So I can't imagine asking for that in the 60s in Liberia. That took a lot of bravery.
If I
Yeah,
could just add real quick, you'll find all over the globe the people who make the most noise and push back the most are often the people who crowd prisons. Those are the groups of people who are disenfranchised, who don't have anything. It's almost like the government sucks resources directly out of their communities. And I feel like it's parallel in every society on the planet. The people who can be beaten and can be forced to live a certain way and be okay with it, they live in peace amongst the oppressors. But those of us, y'all know how black people are in America. Our ancestors was not having it from the second they set foot in America. So I would imagine it's the same thing in these different places.
you know. Um, I think so. My next note was about how there was the there was that man who was also a part of like strikes for higher wages, and he was let go by the mining company, and they just dropped him and his family just outside of the town. So like, just a different form of colonization where it's like your labor is attached. I mean, it's still today with capitalism, right? Your labor is attached to your way of survival, right? So like, the minute that you aren't able to give them this labor, you couldn't die on the side of the road, and it wouldn't stop anything. You know what I mean? There's where
That was one of the toughest scenes for me to watch in this documentary because like you said, here's a man who had enough courage to speak up just a little bit higher pay. All I'm asking for is a little bit higher pay. And instead they completely snatched his job and dumped him and his family on the side of the road with very few belongings and then had him sign a note because obviously they didn't have, cell phones and computers back then. So they had him sign a note that said, they drop me off. I'm okay with it. Sign here. And I'm just like, I could not sign that piece of paper. They would have had to shoot me because I just can't see how people just suck it up and deal with it. But that's his reality. That's what happens. If you try to fight back in Liberia in 1966, this is what's going to happen to you. And so that was really hard for me to watch, like the whole family. And like you said, it reminds me how in America, oh, you lost your job? Guess you don't have any more health care. And those two things should not be synonymous.
yeah, yeah. Um, the next part too, the note about how the military was used to put a scare on the workers into compliance when they were doing the strikes. And I thought it was also really interesting that the person who was um the head of that regiment of the military, right, he was a Black American man, and you could hear in his voice how he was a little, I don't know, maybe that's me just putting it on him, but it sounded as if he was a little like troubled by what he had to do and the orders that he was giving.
Yeah, yeah.
Because in the beginning, he's like, we were first told to just break up the strike. And then he was like, the second, we were told just to shoot above their heads. And then they were told then to wound people to break it up. And I think it's still a tactic that they use. I mean, I'm not. I have to work with the fact that a lot of Black people have military families, have police family. You know what I mean? But I think there's
Right.
also something that Black people have to wrestle with in the ways that the state is then or the state or the oppressive state is using Black people against Black people. You know what I mean? Because a lot of Black people join the military for economic reasons, right? Like you're
Mhm.
starving them economically and then forcing them to join a force to then economically and oppress other Black people somewhere else. Like,
It
and
is.
it's still to this
It's a
day,
trade-off.
till this day, AFRICOM is led. This is the military bases within Africa that actually expanded under Obama, which another
Mm.
Black person, but the general of AFRICOM is General Langley, another Black man. It's just a continuous tactic of colonization to use Black people um, within the police, within the military, to keep other Black people in line.
Right. I was going to add how in the documentary they called them sort of these intermediaries. Like
Mhm.
you have the settlers on one side, the natives on the other, and then in the middle you have like policemen and soldiers. And like you said, sometimes Black people were like, "Oh, I'm gonna become a cop because I'll make an honest living for my family and I'll have all these benefits." But sometimes people see you as a sellout or a traitor because you're joining the man. And listen, we could get into police brutality all day long, but I just feel like you said it is that trade-off where yes, I do want to see more Black cops. I do want to see more Black cops who look like me, who are from my neighborhood, policing the neighborhood where we live. But then you have those people who the blue comes first, and so it's kind of the same with the army, right? So it's definitely a tough position to be in. That's why I'm not in that position. That's why I've always known I don't think I could be a police officer, but I've considered being a lawyer. And so sometimes I think to myself, if I'm a lawyer, do I want to be like Kamala, the prosecutor who was, putting people in jail and people had something to say about that? Or do I want to be defending criminals? So either way you look at it, you're always kind of going to be in the middle as far as when you climb this career ladder and you climb the ranks of the army or whatever, sometimes it's going to be the political party over your people. So that's an area I don't want to get into for myself personally.
Yeah, I think it's worth engaging, it's worth interrogating. You know what I mean? Especially like in the juxtaposition of like, do I want to be a prosecutor or do I want to, you know, defend criminals? And it's like, what's criminality when like the system is
Right.
necessitates violence? You know what I mean? You have a convicted rapist as your president, and your other option was someone who was facilitating genocide. It's like this thing necessitates violence, and it's like, how do you then not expect it to reap out into our communities? You know what I mean? Like, how do you expect
Yeah.
people not to, or how do you think that you could just lock people up and that would solve that kind of violence when this is the violence that you use to maintain this
Right.
country? You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's
Um,
why I feel like we're never going to know peace because if we did know peace, then we wouldn't need all these other systems and all these other people. So they want us to stay in this type of environment of violence. You're right.
mhm. um, Also, because they had that portion where they had the Swedish people talking about they were building the church,
Red
and
flag for the Swedish people. Red flag. They pissed me off so much. Oh my God. Because
yeah,
again, with the Christians, like you think you're doing the right thing, but you're still a colonizer.
and they had just watching them speak, and in the background all the Black labor that was going into building these churches, and them not even catching the interviewer, and out there asking them like, you don't think that these people need like a hospital or like all the, like, out of all the type of infrastructure that you would build here first for people, the first thing you did was build these churches. And I think that is also like resonates with how the church and the state moved together. You know what I mean? Like
Let's talk about it.
these missionaries were violent endeavors. Like, I thought that just showed that and highlighted that really well.
Absolutely. I thought it was funny because the clip that you're mentioning, I remember turning to Brother Ash. I was like, look at the little Black boy in the background. he was kind of looking at the interview like, what y'all doing over there? If you're going to be talking about me and asking about my people, maybe you should come over here and actually interview us and stop asking them. The little black boy was getting closer and closer to the camera. I don't know if you peeped that.
Like,
So I
Yeah,
felt
but
like he wanted to
that's
say
what they
something.
do. That's what they
that's
do.
understandable.
When they infiltrated people, the first thing they do is strip them of their beliefs and teach them to believe the things that they want them to. And the easiest way to do that, I'm a religious man myself, but the easiest way you can do that is to build a church and to make it the people's objective to uphold the church, to spread the wisdom and the philosophies of the church, which will almost every time be a philosophy that will put the oppressed people under more pressure and leave them with less. They teach you how to oppress yourself. And that's religion is one of the many tools of colonizers worldwide. So that was something that it didn't surprise me. And it was interesting to see that young black man in the back, because I'm like, man, he got to be like, you know, an older man now if he's still living. And I'm just wondering, like, if he ever had the opportunity to see this documentary, what would his thoughts be, you know?
Yeah. But Josh, if you got any thoughts on what you were seeing, oh, you're muted. You're muted, brother.
I'm sorry. When did you guys hear any of that I said about the guy in the
Yes, I
camp?
did.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
actually wanted to add how, Shamir had made a note of here they are building all these churches, but they could clearly utilize some more infrastructure like schools and hospitals. And I feel like that's always, that's even in America, right? We're always focused on the wrong thing. Like, oh, let's spend all this money to go to space when we could be putting that money into black neighborhoods who need better schools. You know what I'm saying? And it just kills me how colonizers, they're always just dreaming. They're not in reality.
Yeah. They also try to attack the ongoing problem of black on black crime. Crime is crime to me.
Red
So
flag, yeah.
when you have people who are disadvantaged who have to steal or commit violence just to get by, that's not a black problem. That happens in any community of people who have less than what they need. So it just it poses questions of Afro pessimism. And to me, you know, a lot of the footage that we seen was just kind of interesting. It kind of had it was a quote that said, "Our eyes are wide open. We are united over the cause to defend our country." And it made me see, you know, like the women that were, you know, joining these armies, you know, as these bombs are like kind of just flying in left and right. And it's kind of like these type of environments, they cause people to unite. As much as people want to try to put differences in between black people and different, you know, people who are becoming colonized, they force us to come together. So another quote from the documentary said, "We don't know when we will be free. We just know that we will be free. We know it will be free." Basically saying we don't understand like when this is going to end, but I'm going to teach my children to fight and they're going to teach their children to fight. So eventually we will have to be free because we refuse to stop before our oppressors stop. So I thought that was...
I know exactly the part of the documentary you're talking about when they literally had to like pick up and like move to the jungle because that was the only place where they felt safe together. And it just broke my heart how you said there were bombs being dropped by the Portuguese army all day and night. You didn't know when you were going to be safe, if you were going to be safe, if you could go to sleep. And that's just putting us under even more mental stress and physical stress. I think, Shamir, you mentioned it, like we carry this tension as black people in our bodies, in our physicality from slavery times because we're always on edge. You never know when somebody's going to come for you. And I can't imagine literally fighting for my life as bombs are being dropped on me.
And we aren't as far removed from...
I was going to say, you know, Russia got the nuclear code, so I'm nervous every day.
But this is... The documentary we're covering is, you know, it's taking place in Mozambique in the 70s and the 60s. I have aunts and uncles who were the age of some of these people who were children during the documentary. You know what I mean? So violence enlightens. It's a cleansing force. It makes colonized people feel fearless and it restores their own self-respect because when you have to use violence in order to protect your way of life, you get to a point where you do not allow people to infringe on your freedom at all. And it's unfortunate that violence sometimes is the only thing that can gauge that, but it's just the reality of human existence. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
And
I think that,
decolonization.
oh, my bad. I was going to say, I think that like showed earlier in the documentary too, when they're talking to this dude from Rhodesia, and it's after, I believe it's after Tanzania got their independence, and he's like, they're asking him, how are the Africans like walking around now? Like, how's their demeanor? And he's like, almost like they're full of themselves or something. And it's like, yeah, right? It's like, but that's also, I think, what Fanon is naming here. It's like, once you've done it, it's like, because one of the things I think is the biggest, like, barrier for Black people to actually like gain liberation, right, is fear, and it's a fear of violence, and it's a natural fear of violence, right? Like you don't see, I don't think people really think about how like the violence that the Black Panthers went through, like watching their offices being raided and shot up by police, watching them assassinate people, watching them put people in jail, watching them exile people, how much that violence can then make people fearful in being able to, fight for themselves. But Fanon is naming violence as a cleansing force. Like it sheds you of that fear. It sheds you, and it almost turns you into a new person, right? Where it's like the things that I was scared of happening are no longer keeping me down and bound. And that's what he's naming in this chapter in this documentary.
I think it's interesting because I also feel like, one, decolonization never goes unnoticed, but the violence that takes place in decolonization helps to hold people accountable. If you want to know why the Black Panthers were walking around with, heavy artillery, if you want to know why people in Mozambique were, why certain soldiers who were trying to take their land ended up being amputees. This is why, because they were sent there to take their land. So this is what they got back in return. I am a peaceful individual, but I can't allow, like, if somebody were to come into my house right now and say, yo, I'm taking all of your equipment, I live here now, and you're still gonna have to work for me, I will be like, yo, you're crazy. And I'm gonna fight to the death until you realize how passionate I feel about my people. Because independence allows countries to make their own culture, to have their own beliefs, to have their own systems. So if you're coming in and you're trying to take that away, then it's almost a necessary thing. Like, it's just as necessary as any other part of nature that keeps the world spinning. So we just
I got a question for y'all, though. I have a question for both of y'all, and I would love to hear y'all answer. What do you think should be prioritized? And I've heard this recently, but like, what do you think should be prioritized? Peace or justice?
I think justice. I think peace starts with the individual. But I think justice should be prioritized when you talk about what a people should focus on. I think we should focus on justice. Because peace is kind of like, it's hard to define peace. Like, what I see as peace, my enemy could see as chaos. You know what I mean? So that's
my answer is different. My answer, I was going to say we need peace more than justice because, like you said, who defines justice? Are we talking about the justice system? Because we know that was not built for us. And on top of that, I feel like equity kind of falls under justice. If we want things to be just, we need them to be equitable. And I don't know if America specifically, if we will ever see equity where not just, oh, everybody's got the same broomstick. No, I need one for my height. You need one for your height. Or I need one because I'm disabled. You know what I'm saying? That's equity. And so I feel like peace, we might be able to get a little more people on board rather than justice. I don't know. I feel like peace is a pipe dream, though. I'm sorry to say. I feel like there's nothing peaceful about this administration if I'm talking about America, right? So that's what leads me to think the only way we could win is justice. But then we see, like you said, the man who's nominated for president, you get tried for rape and nothing happens to you. So
Yeah. That's kind of why I have the opinion I had, because I feel like if you do something wrong, justice holds you accountable. Whereas peace can be defined by the person who wields it. So you can consider peace in the inner city if you don't have two rival gangs going at each other for 30 days. There haven't been any shootings, there haven't been any robberies, there haven't been any assaults or anything like that. But it may still be elements in the community that aren't being handled justly. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's a good question. I don't really think it's a wrong answer depending on how you explain it. But to me, I would just like to see people who commit terrible and heinous acts. I would just love to see them naturally be held accountable. Like you commit a wrongdoing, you serve time, or you're punished, or violence meets you because of it. If you punch somebody in the face, you should get punched in the fucking face. That's how I feel. So, whereas peace can be like, I think this is a peaceful time in American history, but if you check in with those group of people, they might not think so. And I think it's so hard, like you said, it's almost like a dream. Like, how do we ever get to that point? I think justice is a lot easier to get than peace.
I think justice can be really hard to get. And I think people might actually try to maintain a fake peace in order not to confront what just because I think just like when I was talking about genocide earlier, I think we got because you were saying it too, Christine, like you were saying, what is justice in an unjust system? So like our definition of justice has to be different. And if we think about our definitions of justice, I think it's not peaceful to what the status quo is. You know what I mean? So like I think of the saying like, no justice, no peace. Like if there is no justice, I can't let you fucking have brunch and shit. You know what I mean? Like
that's true.
My child is dead. My people are dead. It is a bit of a
facade. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna just let you eat.
I agree. Yeah.
Croissants and shit. My people are dead. Yeah. Like no. Like no peace.
Right.
So
good question.
just to kind of start to bring stuff home. Just want to remind all of our listeners that colonization is always started because of basically European countries wanting to capitalize off of the natural manufactured goods that come from places like Africa, wood, diamonds, oil. And it basically, this documentary helps to capture the idea that Europe is literally the creation of the third world. Because they come into these red flag. They come into these countries like, oh, these people don't have this, they don't have that, but these people have their own systems and their own beliefs, and we don't see the scale of violence. We don't see the scale of tragedy that we see until they come in, and you know, the colonization begins, and then that's when we start to see violence, and you know, violence begets violence.
It's that capitalism. Capitalism. Europeans have always been money hungry. They don't care what you have. They want your silk. They want your cotton. And I feel like without the labor of us and, you know, putting all this on our backs, we would not be where we are today without the little man, you know, building it up for the Europeans. And so when they said that capitalism has always had colonizers behaving like war criminals, that was a bar right there. Because, again, they try to act so sophisticated. But you're literally a war criminal, taking things like a pirate.
Yeah, if we had to write a list of wrongdoings and compare them, you know what I'm saying? Like
it wouldn't even compare.
It wouldn't be close. And I think it's interesting because, you know, Europeans get, you know, this rap because other nations of Asia and Africa were powerful nations in times in history. But they were able to spread knowledge and teach other nations what they knew. And there were wars, and yes, there were slaves. But I feel like the European colonialism is just such a scar on humanity. And it's because of this need for greed and this need to expand at the natives' expense. And to me, that's where this becomes such a problem. So Fannin suggests that Europeans
My bad.
have to
I just wanted to say, like, I think that's also what makes this show, because I think also, because I don't know if that's what you meant earlier, but like, I think some people, when they hear this like violence, there's a reaction to it where it's like it's a condoning of violence, and it's not necessarily a condoning of violence, more so like this is what's naturally going to happen, right? So like people are like, I don't know, when it came to Palestine, there was a lot of people who wanted a condemnation of the violence of October 7th, right? They wanted a condemnation, and it's like, how do you condemn it when we understand it to be a natural process of people's oppression? Like when Nat Turner had those slave revolts,
people were
like
so mad. I'm like, if I was
everybody,
I would be shooting back too. Like, I'm sorry, but you're not about to come for me and expect me not to come back for you. And
I'm sorry, but like when they had the Nat Turner revolts, like they killed massive amounts of white people, even white babies. Like white babies were murdered, and it's not us here sitting condoning like, yeah, kill this white baby, but we're talking about what is going to be a natural process, what's going to just be natural to you enslaving people, to you ripping fetuses out of women's stomachs. Like, this is things that you've done, and you can't be shocked when the violence comes back to you. Nor can you say that people can't use violence,
right,
or then equate it to the violence that you use to subjugate people. It's not the same. Like, just like a woman fighting her abuser, like the violence, it's not equal,
I think that kind of goes into the next point I was going to make. When Fannin suggests that Europeans have to wake up and stop playing Sleeping Beauty. If they really want to help natives and join the rest of humanity, I feel like they do need to understand the transgressions that they have committed. And they have to, and it goes back to understanding their history. White people today should understand the disconnect between black people because of what their ancestors did to our ancestors. And I think until that is addressed wholeheartedly and not, sugar-coated, then we may not ever be able to move forward. I don't know if it's possible for us to move forward.
Thank you. That's a red flag for me when people be like, oh, you're still not over slavery. It was so long ago.
No, I'm not. No,
I'm not over it.
I'm still mad about that shit. I still can't, when I eat some of the images seen in this documentary, even though this wasn't a direct lineage from my ancestry, it still makes me furious to see that babies and women and people who are just wanting to live freely on the land that they were born on have to fight so, intensely. And it's just like, how can you expect any group of people to excuse your violence when while you were committing it, it seemed natural? Like, it seemed natural for a village to be bombed in Mozambique. You know what I'm saying? So like, you can't find it unnatural for us to uprise and to turn your society upside down. It's natural. It's the way of life. Any discipline of religion or philosophy will teach you what goes around comes back around. Some people call it karma. Some people call it God don't like ugly. At the end of the day, what you do comes back to you, and most of the time it comes back tenfold.
I think also one of the things, especially about the Europeans returning back to humanity, because I think a lot of people forget that what's it called? Enlightenment. The Enlightenment age was happening around the same time as these colonization, right? So like, what separated, Josh, you brought up how there was slavery and colonization prior to European colonization of the world, but this was the force that connected the world. Like, there was never a time in history where the world was connected, and the connection was being made through colonization and slavery, right? Like, whole communities of people who've never seen a black person in their life are being introduced to black people in the context of a slave. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And that
Yeah.
permanently changes how you view this person. So like there's a point where he's talking about humanity and like you're there's humanity is being defined around whiteness, right? Like what it is to
Yeah.
be human, what it is to be a man and or a woman is what it is to be white. You know what I mean? Black women are forever characterized as masculine, angry, all these associations that are detached from what you would consider a woman, especially the violence that Black women face
because they
is not
don't see us
synonymous
as
with what
human
you consider
beings.
a woman, yeah,
Yeah.
or even a human being, right? This is not what you, but that non-human thing is attached to blackness in and of itself. And Fanon is really brilliant because, like in Wretched of the Earth, the last chapter, he's goes over his meetings and some of the things that he's had with soldiers on both the colonized and the colonizer, right? Where he's talking to um, Algerian soldiers who suffered from the war and their PTSD, the things that they face. But then he's also talking to the colonizers, these French soldiers who are like, um, I'm having nightmares about this person that I killed, and I can't. Why can't I stop? I can't sleep. You know what I mean? And that's where
Yeah.
he's talking about like Europeans have to return back to your humanity. This is not something that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
also making Black and colonized people the unhuman, but this process is also divorcing you from your humanity. You know what
Exactly.
I mean? And it's like you wake up, Sleeping Beauty. And it's so funny how
I
there's like anti-woke and shit,
yeah.
but like because they don't
It
want to wake
makes
up.
it makes them it makes them realize that their lifestyle and what they've been taught to experience as far as just dealing with people who are different than you, governing a group of people. It shows them, it blares in neon colors that it's not humane, simply.
Mhm.
And that they need a different blueprint for what it means to be human and what it means to be righteous. Because you can't tell me you ought not to bring up a God that loves everybody while you're committing rape and while you're committing murder just for economic gain. You shouldn't even be bringing up God in those conversations.
Is that a
So
red?
now, yeah, we're at the point now, and I'll close with this. The West has now basically justified slavery and crimes because the United States still has that same European spirit. Basically saying everything that we talked about with this documentary has now been affiliated with America and different European countries who have been influenced by Europeans. And a lot of Western societies and cultures just have completely grown disgusted with it. So,
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but the capitalism just infuriates me. I hate to keep going back to our administration, but the fact that people be like, "Oh, he's a businessman. I'm going to be rich just like him one day." That's not the type of blueprint I want for my life.
Mhm.
at
If
what
it,
cost?
exactly, if it's going to come with, like you said, the lack of humanity, then you can keep it. I don't want it. And I love how they talked about in the documentary how now that these African countries have regained their independence, and even in America, like you said, more Black people are starting to work together and unite. I feel like that is what helps us preserve our culture as well. Because in colonization, your own culture is wiped out, and now it's the European culture, like you said, the European beauty standards for Black
Yeah.
women, and everything down from our housing to our education to the way we look and the things that we watch on television. Now, when it's like I want to wear a Black and Proud T-shirt, people are looking at me crazy. Why are you looking at me crazy? This is my culture. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I feel like it was kind of normalized to like push that to the background, and we was perming our hair, straightening our hair, trying to be like them. Now that we're gaining that independence, we're trying to, preserve our own culture. So I like to see that in the documentary.
I think in the
Yeah.
documentary too, when he's talking about how like we can't imitate Europe, especially in the age of like climate change. Like we have to redefine what like development and industrial, because like the world does not have the capacity for everyone to be like America, right? Like the world doesn't have the capacity for everybody to have two cars, um,
4-bedroom
to
house.
4-bedroom TV in every room. Like it doesn't have the capacity to do it. And like this is some of the crumbs that's given to Black people, period, right? Like it pales into comparison to some of the mansions you see where like it's beyond just a TV in every house, right? Or like there's 5, 6 cars in the garage, like, but the world can't seek to imitate that, right? Like, because in order to imitate it, you had to enslave and colonize and commit genocide. You know what I mean? And it's like, just like you said, it's not a blueprint. Like, you can't be Donald Trump. Not only does the system not allow it, but like, it's not something that you should desire. Like, to be a sex offender, to be someone who exploits brown and Black labor. Like, that's the only way he's able to become Donald Trump. You know what I mean? And that's nothing. Yeah.
So just so many great takeaways from this documentary. Thanks again, Shamir, for recommending it to us. This was our first time having a guest, and I loved having you on the show and getting your perspective. Because like you said, sometimes we have similar ideas, but when it comes to peace and justice, maybe we're on different sides of the fence, you know, and that's okay. I think the most important thing is just waking people up to this. So please check out this documentary concerning violence. We caught it on Amazon Prime, but like Brother Ash said, you can watch it on YouTube and other sources. And if you don't watch the documentary, maybe check out the book, The Wretched of the Earth. Definitely want to learn about colonization and decolonization. Yeah, show the shirt. He's got the title of the book on the shirt. Okay, that's what's up.
Yeah, it was like a comic. I don't know if you could see it. They have like French Fanon on it. Like, I don't know. It's hard to see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like going out.
Yeah.
I love that. So let's get into some watching awards, y'all. You know, every episode we kind of talk about the highlight of the documentary for us. And I'm going to have to give mine to the women of these guerrilla armies. Specifically, there was a point in the documentary where it was women from Mozambique 1972 talking. They were the ones who said that we are united over the cause to defend our country, quote, end quote. And that just, I just was just feeling so, you know, empowered by those women, because like I said, I don't know if we were back in those days and I was fighting for my freedom. I don't know if I would be a Rosa Parks or if I would be a, you know, I don't know which side I would be on. Would I be cowering and going to church every day, or would I be picking up my arms and joining the army? So I'm not sure what side I would be on if I was in their shoes, but I'm so proud to see how these women said, look, we're going to join this army because we are united to defend our country. That was the most important thing for them. And these are women who also have to raise a family, be a wife, raise kids. And still, they're like, we're fearless. We're joining an army. So that's my Watchy Award. Shout out to them. That footage from 72 was awesome.
My Watchy Award is going to go to Miss Lauryn Hill. I just think that it's important, like I touched on earlier, for everybody to play their part when it comes to just education of our people and, you know, what goes on in this world. And I think that her narrating this documentary, one, she did a great job. Just her words, certain people can just speak and their words just carry weight. And when she would say stuff about, she just kept saying the word violence. And hearing the word violence come from Lauryn Hill's mouth just did something to the listener, which made you understand how severe and how passionate that she was and how these people were about, you know, obtaining liberation at any cost. So my Watchy Award goes to Miss Lauryn Hill for playing her role as a great speaker and artist.
Yeah, supposedly she had to do it so many, because she's read the book so many times that she was like flying through her lines, and they're like, your voice needs to like slow down the pace because your voice isn't really going to be able to like translate it. You know what I mean? Like, and it works like from the beginning line. You know what I mean? It's Lauren. But my Watch Award would probably go to Thomas Sankara. He was shown later in the film speaking French. He was the liberator of Burkina Faso, which was a French colony in Africa. My award to him was specifically because, like, as far as the documentary, it's like focused on like violence, and it's like raw form. And his part of the documentary was the only part where he talked about imperialism and violence in the form of like loans and things like that. And that's something that they do a lot with like Africa, and I'm Haitian, so they do that a lot with Haiti. But I also think about like Palestine too, where there was this idea that like, okay, we could give you guys aid and things like that, but at the other end, we're still doing bombs. But the aid that we give you is conditional, right? Like we want supposedly natural. I mean, you guys to have self-determination, quote unquote, but you can't have Hamas as your leading party. You know what I mean? You guys can't. We have to choose who is leading. Otherwise, your banks. You know what I mean? You're no longer able to bank, or your industries like Cuba. They have a blockade on Cuba. And I don't think people see it as violence, but like during the pandemic, Cuba was able to come up with a vaccine, but they can't get any syringes because those are American companies. You know what I mean? And they can't do business. So I just thought that part where Thomas Sankara is naming like imperialism and the type of like soft power violence that happens, that isn't amputees, but could lead to amputees, like still is important to name. So yeah, thank you guys also for watching this documentary and challenging yourself, because it's challenging topics and challenging documentary period, and I appreciate you guys like taking that on.
Challenging but necessary. So thank you for bringing this to our attention, and we look forward to working in the future.
Yes, at the end of this documentary, I was ready to pick up arms and ready to fight somebody. So I do want to keep that spirit. I do want to keep that energy. So again, make sure you guys check out this documentary. It's titled Concerning Violence. If you liked what you heard today, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review the show. Leave us a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or I think you can also comment on our Spotify page. Let us know your thoughts on this. You know, is violence the answer? At this point, I think it's the only answer, but would still love to hear the other side of it if anybody wants to share their thoughts in the comments. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Instagram at WatchworthyPod. All right, until next time.
Peace.
All right, and that's it. I'm going to stop recording. Let me see.